Coming up next, we've got Robin Shields, Professor of Education at Bristol University. Before we go over to Robin, and he was in yesterday's summit and he will be joining us in our leadership panel, just a reminder, we're in the chat function. If you're going to engage, there's a little drop-down menu. It's right now set to default to all panelists, but we do encourage you to click down and set all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see what you are saying, not just our panelists. So thank you very much. And with that, I will sort of hand it over to Robin.
Hello, my name is Robin Shields, and I'm a Professor of Education at the University of Bristol. Even though we're separated by time and by distance, I'm very excited to be speaking with you today, and I'd like to thank the conference organizers for making that possible. I'd welcome your thoughts and feedback via Twitter at Robin Shields, or through other conversations that happen in the course of the conference. My title today is Between a Rock and a Hard Place, Finding a Way Forward for International Higher Education. By this title, I mean that higher education is facing two sets of difficult challenges in terms of internationalization. The first is that current models of internationalization are not sustainable. And I mean sustainability here in a broad sense, encapsulating many kinds of sustainability. The first is in relation to climate change. So there are about 5 million students who go to another country for studies in higher education every year, and most of them travel by airplane, and this has an immense carbon footprint. So in one study, I've estimated that this is between 14 and 39 megatons of carbon emitted into the atmosphere every year, which is comparable to the entire emissions of small to medium-sized countries. So this is obviously a large challenge in terms of sustainability. We cannot keep flying people around the world in the way that we have up until now and escape the very worst effects of climate change. Now, air travel is actually a relatively small component of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's less than 5%, but it is also one which is very unequal. So, for example, one long-haul flight, just a one-way flight, often produces more carbon than an individual in a low-income country will for the entire year in their lives. So there's a big inequality between those who are able to be mobile and those who are not. A second sense in which internationalization is not sustainable is in terms of skills and the job market. So universities pride themselves on equipping their graduates to be successful in a job market which is embedded in an economy which is fundamentally unsustainable. It's heavily reliant on carbon-based energy and environmental consumption which can't be sustained over the long term. The third way in which internationalization is not sustainable is in terms of inequality and access to higher education. So the ability to access international, or the ability to study abroad, is largely determined by the ability to pay often higher tuition fees than students within the country of study will pay. And although there are scholarships available, many or most students have to be able to fund their own studies. This circumvents national policies which might emphasize equity of access for different groups or by gender, and so increases inequality over time. Third, the coronavirus crisis has highlighted that internationalization is not sustainable in terms of institutional funding and finances. So higher education institutions are generally supposed to be durable over long periods of time, but international enrollments can fluctuate wildly from year to year. Until now, this fluctuation has mainly been a pattern of growth, so it's benefited universities, and many have come to rely on international student enrollments as a core aspect of their financial model. However, the current crisis shows how what goes up can also come down, and so many universities are facing a large hole in their budget and looking at cutting staff numbers over the coming years due to fluctuation in international student enrollment. So this is another sense in which internationalization as we know it today is not sustainable. However, the other challenge is that international higher education is increasingly necessary. One reason is that there is a growth in right-wing nationalist and populist movements around the world. I am speaking to you today from the United Kingdom, and we certainly had our share here. These movements often embed racist or sexist ideologies and aim to pit different groups, national groups or ethnic groups, against one another. And so international higher education can help promote understanding between different nationalities, which can resist these movements or challenge them. The second is that there are many global challenges, such as climate change, such as the refugee crisis, that require cooperation between different nations, and international study can lay a valuable foundation for individuals to work across national borders and to work with different nationalities throughout their lives. So it's very necessary to face these challenges. And third, there are many well-documented benefits to international education, both for individuals and for universities. For individuals, these benefits include self-confidence, improved communication skills, greater tolerance towards other groups, and employability, better outcomes in the job market. For institutions, benefits include access to new curricula and also new research opportunities. So we are currently between a rock and a hard place. We have these two challenges, and so the question is, how do we move forward? I've outlined four very brief hypothetical paths forward that we could take, and I'll discuss them briefly. The first would be, following presumably a downturn from the coronavirus over the next year or two, to resume business as usual, or to try to revert to the methods of internationalization that we've been doing. This will be tempting because it will offer a source of revenue for universities, but over the longer term, it's almost certainly unsustainable. The current levels of greenhouse gas emissions that we are producing as a global society will almost certainly result in catastrophic climate change if we don't address this, and universities will certainly suffer from those effects. The second would be to move to more sustainable forms of provision, so to look at how we can offer courses by distance education, hold academic conferences online, such as this one, or perhaps work in partnerships to deliver courses overseas. The courses would then be sustainable, and we'd be kind of highlighting a sustainable model of provision, but we would still be providing graduates for an economy and a society which are fundamentally unsustainable. So a third way to move forward would be to transform higher education, to look at the types of research that we conduct, the teaching that we do, the types of knowledge that we value, and perhaps look to alternative knowledge systems, indigenous education in many parts of the world, to create a form of higher education that puts sustainability at the center and produces graduates that think in a different way, perhaps an industry or society would want at the moment, but who can reshape society to become more sustainable. And finally, we can look at higher education as an agent for transformation. So although universities are dependent upon national governments for funding, they can also push back in a way and create change within a society. So they can influence companies, they can influence governments to change current economic models to become more sustainable. And so obviously the fourth ideal is kind of the best outcome. It's somewhat utopian, and so like many educators or researchers in education, I think I'm very quick to advocate transformation, but the challenge is always, how do we get there? How do we get to this great vision? And I think it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be incremental change. And so the best thing we can do actually is to look at what we did last year and try to improve upon it. So I'm actually a huge favor of incremental change, a huge advocate of incremental change. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. I think it's going to happen through people progressively trying to improve on what they've been doing in the past. But there's a sense of urgency to this. So we need to look at what we've been doing and really push ourselves to try and do a lot better each year. The coronavirus crisis has been a tragedy and has disrupted lives in many different senses, but it will offer us a chance to kind of think things anew, consider the situation afresh, and it will build up a whole set of experiences and abilities to work together online, as we see through this conference. So the next thing we can do is to lead by example. If we expect small businesses that are often squeezed for cash to undergo big changes to become sustainable, we need to show that universities, which are relatively privileged and have large budgets, can do the same. So we need to show what is possible, such as working together online to create meaningful change, as we're doing here. And I think that is the best way to get from where we are, between the rock and the hard place, to something which is much better. So the message here is that although internationalization as we know it is not sustainable, the answer is not to back away from internationalization, but actually to push forward, to become more international, but to do it in a different, more reflective, more intelligent way, which considers environmental costs and tries to show what would be possible if all organizations were to act as we do.
Thank you so much. That was Robin Shields. He will be joining our leadership panel. Some really powerful stuff there about how, you know, international education is they're not necessarily competing forces. The climate action and international education can be powerful forces when working in tandem to make an impact. So looking forward to hearing more on the leadership panel later.